In this video, watch one bearded, smug, arrogant man berate red dots, and watch one bearded, totally not smug, arrogant man defend their honor and make bad jokes. Are you ready? Stand by. So with that out of the way, the VSO Gun Channel is a quality channel. He makes good video, he makes good content. Check him out if you want information on rifles. It's rare that he makes a video on pistol shooting, so it was very interesting that he chose this hill to die on with red dots on pistols. Now, I don't know VSO, I've not interacted with him too much online, just watch one of his videos now and again, but he seems like a pretty good dude, so I'm not going to attack him personally, but I am going to beat his argument like it owes me money.
Where's my money? You gonna give me my money?
So I know what you're thinking, how can one of my favorite video gurus make a video so my most favorite, totally handsome, bearded, not smug or arrogant host has to make a response video? It's me. I'm talking about me. Well, I checked my calendar and it's still 2020, and unfortunately we don't have Tiger King to get us through the holidays this year, so this is the video that you get.
An Oklahoma man who goes by the name Joe Exotic has...
So in all seriousness, the VSO Gun Channel has been around for a long time and it's been doing great. He's got 250,000 subs. I don't agree with all of the stuff that he says, but he approaches a lot of his videos a lot like I do, where it's very kind of no nonsense, and I have no doubt that he believes what he believes because in his context he has observed it working, so he thinks, due to the evidence that he's seen, that what he's saying is correct. And guys, as a YouTuber, we know when we're making clickbait. The algorithm favors outrage content, so he had an opinion that is unpopular and kind of counter to the mainstream opinion that seems to be growing more and more. So he made a video about it and he laid out his arguments as to why that is, knowing full well that it would generate some attention, some of it negative, some of it positive, a lot of it just clicks and views. And you might be saying, but hey, you're making a drama video right now where there is conflict likely to draw eyeballs. Absolutely. But more than anything, I'm a pedant.
Pedant. Pedant.
And in my opinion, somebody said something wrong on the internet, so I need to address it. It's important to note that his experience with guns is markedly different from my own. He's more of like a milsim, sheepdog kind of guy doing the rigorous self-defense type training. And that was where I started, but then I veered hard into the world of IDPA and USPSA gaming with pistols, gun golf, if you will, but our experiences are very different. So if you guys hadn't caught his videos, I'm gonna clip his video and show it to you at 1.5 speed so it keeps things moving, and I'm gonna respond to his points. I'm not gonna present them out of context, but I am going to summarize them the best I can. I'm not going to try and straw man his arguments, but I am going to speak to the point that he's making and how I don't necessarily agree with it. So in the first video, his red dots are for the pores. He talks from about the 2-minute mark to about the 7-minute mark on some of the advantages of the red dot. Now, based on what he's saying those advantages are, it's clear that his understanding of how to use a red dot is pretty shallow. He understands it on a superficial level, but if you watch him shooting his pistol, he doesn't shoot fast enough to really understand how a red dot can be a force multiplier on a pistol. And he presents himself like an authority, so I feel like I do need to kind of suss through this a little bit. Now, if you watch him shooting pistols in any of his pistol reviews, he is a very good shooter in the context of everybody who's ever picked up a pistol. However, if you narrow down that pool and you were to say place him in the context of, say, a USPSA match, he would be a low B to high C, maybe. He shoots with a very deliberate cadence, and he uses only one trigger fundamental when he's addressing the trigger on all shots. So it doesn't matter if it's a burner target at like 10 yards or a precision shot at about 75 yards, they all get the same cadence. And I don't say that simply to throw rocks at the man's skill, because he is very skilled. He can make any shot you need to make with a pistol. The problem is that he doesn't understand the speed side, and so he's missing most of the picture on where the red dot is. But don't take my word for it. Watch some of his pistol review videos and watch him shoot. He is a competent pistol shooter, no doubt. However, he doesn't know how to exploit a set of iron sights, and he has no clue how to exploit a red dot. He doesn't even know the advantage he's missing on. So I realize that that's standing in a glass house throwing rocks. I say that to say that I am a USPSA master rated shooter in both production division and carry optics. Based on other comments he's made, he probably doesn't care about that kind of stuff. The dude is a smart dude. It's obvious he hasn't trained with speed in mind. I'm sure if he took an interest in it, he would progress through the ranks quickly. And to show you just some criteria, I'm showing you 2 stages that I shot at USPSA Nationals right now. In B-roll, one of the stages I came in second. It became a classifier where I shot 100% on, so that's second out of a field of 200 and something at the national event. And another stage, which was more fundamentals based, shooting at 25 yards and 15 yards, where I came in 4th in carry optics. So I can shoot like VSO, but I'm not sure he can shoot like I can. And that's important if you're gonna make comments like he's making that holistically approach the red dot sight when there's an entire aspect of the sight that he hasn't even bothered to explore yet. But let's dive into what his arguments are. So he goes on to say that you get a false aptitude by shooting a red dot.
When you take a red dot and you throw it on a pistol, it's good that it takes all of this, holster to presentation and then sight alignment, sight picture. It's good that it takes all that out. But because the individual is no longer doing this, it negatively impacts their overall aptitude as far as being able to pick up a gun and shoot it. So you need to look no further than this. If you take a dude who's shot a whole bunch of red dots on pistols and not a whole lot of iron sights and give him an iron sighted pistol, his hit percentage will go through the floor because he or she has not established excellent fundamentals inherent to using iron sights. Flip that equation and hand a dude who is awesome with iron sights a red dotted pistol. And once he gets over the height and presentation issues with the red dot, he will laser everything because he has gotten all of this, the handsiness, worked out of his system because he's used to having to deal with the optic not filtering out all that error that we talked about.
And while I have no doubt there's anecdotal experience from his own life that makes him say that, that's completely opposite of what my experience has been on the USPSA gamer side. A red dot screams at you when you're doing stuff wrong. If you've got a bad trigger pull, it's going to show you because the dot's going to move. If you've got a bad sight picture, it's going to show you because the dot's not going to be on the window. So what a red dot actually is a training boon. It gives you so much data that when you're actually practicing, you become a much better shooter much faster than you would if you had just picked up a set of irons and tried to learn marksmanship the traditional way. Now, his experience may be with guys who don't train. What my experience is with guys who shoot USPSA, and that basically is saying that you have to have an Instagram account and you have to post videos of yourself dry firing on it. And a fun fact is if you put a piece of painter's tape over the front lens of your red dot so your backup irons don't line up, you realize that your index is total trash. Iron-sighted shooters, when they develop, subconsciously will align their sights as they present by reading their sights, not necessarily having the sights show up and be in alignment, but kind of steering them into alignment as they finish their presentation, which is fine. But if you want to develop a really rock-solid index and be able to shoot at the speed of sight, that's going to be the ticket, and it's very difficult to achieve that on irons unless you train that way intentionally, and most self-defense style shooters don't quite train up to that level, especially if they're using irons. Different story on the guys using dots, because any dot shooter is going to develop that same index every single time. And admittedly, there is a skill set at running irons fast, but increasingly, the guys who are shooting irons at performance speeds use fiber optic fronts and target focus shooting, shooting their iron sights effectively the same way that people shoot red dots. So to say that that skill set of developing a rock solid index isn't going to translate from gun to gun is sort of missing the picture. But then he keeps going, and he basically says that putting a red dot on your gun is going to make you stop practicing.
Not filtering out all that error that we talked about previously. Along those same lines, I would say that it marginalizes secondary forms of training, like dry fire practice, for instance. If somebody goes to the range with their red dotted pistol and their hit percentage is 99%, a lot of guys will be like, well, you know, I've got some reinforcement that I'm freaking awesome and I don't really need to do anything else. So they may neglect dry fire practice when they go home. They may neglect those holster draws. They're getting feedback that everything that they are doing is right and therefore there's nothing for them to improve upon. At least that's a very narrow-minded sense of self.
Now that's been completely opposite my experience in USPSA when people adopt a dot gun. All of a sudden, an entire world is opened up to them with all of the data that the dot is feeding them on the front of their gun. If anything, people generally level up significantly in their skill because all of a sudden they can self-diagnose and self-correct all the issues that they're having and truly develop great fundamentals and great skill. It's not uncommon for somebody to jump into carry optics and immediately become an upperclassman because they start practicing more. In fact, that's pretty typical. Guys will jump into carry optics and end up being an A class or even an M or GM within about a year or 18 months. But if all we're talking about is Joe Average standing on a static range punching paper, do you guys see that? I just put all 50 of those shells in the lower A zone at 7 yards. If you guys want lessons, just hit me up on my DMs and Instagram. I'm out of here. And it seems to imply that his dry fire regimen is going to be kind of more like trigger control based, and probably, I'm guessing, a lot of like first shot presentations and probably some like concealment reload type stuff that is typical in the self-defense space. And that's good that you're practicing, but it's kind of the tip of the iceberg on what you can accomplish in dry fire. I could be totally wrong on that, and I am willing to eat crow, and I apologize if I did miss my mark there, but that's what it sounds like the practice is building up to. But more importantly, you're drawing a generalization from the low end of the talent pool and applying it to the whole range, when based on just your anecdotal evidence and my anecdotal evidence is clearly not the case. And to sort of hammer that point home, he sort of lets the cat out of the bag before the conclusion of the video, where he lets his true opinion be known. He refers to red dots on pistols as it's not a fad, it's an institutionalized crutch. So the fact that he's referring to this as a crutch and he doesn't understand the application of a red dot specifically at speed, how you can maintain the exact same accuracy that he's achieving, but at a significantly faster cadence where shooting becomes the speed of sight. Like legitimately, you're constrained when you're shooting a red dot by how good your recoil control is and how fast you can draw your eyes from target to target. So there's an entire world of shooting red dots that he hasn't explored, and he's making these arguments generalized as if like, yes, I've developed this skill, I know how to use these things to their full effectiveness, and I'm delivering my opinion to you. My guess is that he's still coming up the learning curve on his development, because if he understood how to shoot the streak, how to basically watch the little ribbon of light bounce up and down between multiple targets and watch how much it wobbles and all that great stuff, he wouldn't be talking like he's talking. And that kind of shows that his walk on the red dot path is kind of just beginning, because at close distances, a red dot is not really a big advantage. You're going to be able to know where all of your shots went with a higher degree of confidence, because calling shots with a red dot is significantly easier. But when you get into the middle and long range pistol shots, that's where a red dot really starts to shine. And if you have practiced with any of the B8 pistol tests that are really popular, like the no fail drill or the test, the advanced super test, your scores are generally going to be better with a dot than they are with irons, especially if there is a time constraint involved. And just because I live in a game where we all have our different like classifications or whatever, basically any class dot shooter is going to shoot the gun generally faster than his equivalent class iron sight shooter. So if you take a production shooter and you take a carry optic shooter, if their classification is the same, the dot shooter is always going to be shooting faster and the accuracy is going to be comparable.
That you don't spend an inordinate amount of time dealing with holster to sights, and then also the whole grip and all that sort of stuff with students across the board. And I suppose what it comes down to is if you would prefer the student to be unconsciously incompetent when it comes to the things that they're doing with the gun in 3 dimensions and grip and all that sort of stuff, as well as how they get it there. If you'd rather them do that, then you're the instructor. It's your prerogative. I'm just saying that when I've seen pistols with red dots on it, a lot of times you take that red dot away from somebody and they're all over the place because they no longer have feedback that tells them their fundamentals suck.
And again, with some training talk, your experience is completely different from mine. I've taught plenty of iron sight shooters how to shoot, and the problem always basically comes down to once they understand sight alignment and they understand sight picture and they're holding it over the target like they should, they pull the trigger and then something happens. And you can tell them what happens, and you try and show it to them a number of different ways on what's actually happening when they yank the trigger. Somebody who's shooting a red dot, when you put a red dot in someone's hand and you can describe to them how the dot is moving and then what's causing that, they can generally fix their grip so that the dot stops moving when they pull the trigger. And then he gets to why I think he made the video in the first place.
That dot disappears and you can no longer sight. If your idea of hitting something at distance is to pick a point above the target and sight the gun there, that is wrong. That is super irresponsible. And if anybody is out there teaching that sort of thing, it's not okay. And this is really hard to describe because I think in mathematics, the closest way that I can state this is if anybody's ever played Gears of War, the grenade arc that shows up on screen, it's a really, really good representation. If you haven't played that, when I think about the sighting picture and I'm making a shot at distance, that's what I think of. I think of how can I draw that arc to a particular place where that bullet will then land on the target versus picking a point and moving it. So I play with the sight to change that arc. So my perception of the sight changes. There's always a reference point on the sight on the target. It's never, hey, let's aim up there. It's not linear, and that's why it's dangerous.
My guess is that he's really proud of his ability to use iron sights like an artillery sight and lob in shots at longer ranges by de-elevating his rear sight. So in his world, it's okay to hold your front sight on the target, then de-elevate your rear sight and then kind of guess on what the bullet's trajectory is going to be, as opposed to using a red dot sight and potentially holding high. Now keep in mind that this is the same VSO gun channel that in his XS Minimalist night sight set refers to using a 6 o'clock hold on a set of iron sights, a gross aiming tool, responsible and good and something that should be desired for shooting at longer pistol distant ranges because they don't occlude the target. So effectively, rather than holding over the target and planning on drop, holding under the target and just guessing at rise is somehow better, more safe, and responsible.
To clarify a little bit, the reason you would want the gun to operate that way as far as the sighting picture is concerned is you have to think about perfect point of aim, point of impact at the most usable distances for handguns, which is like 15 yards and in type stuff. And then those farther distances, the sights will start to cover a substantial portion of the target. So the idea, if the gun is doing this at 10 yards, and then we try to use that same sight picture at 50, for instance, then we're going to be covering the target. We're not going to be able to accurately hit that target because we can't see it. So instead, we move to this, pushes the point of aim down, we coalesce the sights that way, and we get good impacts.
He made a follow-up video to his red dot video where he talks about it some more, and he opens the video making the argument that he used a laser rangefinder at his mall and the longest shot he could potentially have to make with a pistol is over 300 yards.
The day I was at the mall, and I took my laser rangefinder with me, and the longest shot that I've got in my mall is about 300 yards. It's a tiny mall, I understand. Yours is probably much bigger. I think that kind of distance is absolutely ridiculous for pistol shooting. But say something pops off in your mall, I would think, I would hope at least, that I would have the wherewithal to return fire to either retreat or return fire to advance. Realistically speaking, what's probably going to happen is I'm probably going to end up hiding behind the fountain, pissing or pooping my pants. We can all hope. Can't wait.
I think basically creating an entire case for an aiming system because you've developed an esoteric skill that has next to no real-world application is fallacious on a whole different level. There is basically zero context where a private citizen is going to have to take a 100, let alone 300-yard pistol shot. The rules of tort and liability being what they are, you probably don't want to let the bullets go unless you can guarantee hits on your target. And with both the holdover aiming mechanism and the artillery sight approach to the target, we're both guessing. But the problem is that, like, if I know roughly how far away it is, I can adjust my holdover with a good estimation of how the bullet's going to drop. And because it's a red dot sight, I can see the target all the time. If I decide I need to stop taking the shot or whatever reason, that's fine because I'm getting information from the target as I line up my shot on the target. If you're screwing around trying to count lines per inch on the front sight to de-elevate your rear sight, you can't see the target, especially if you're focused so hard on your sights, the target's blurry at 100 yards away. So to say that somehow using a holdover methodology is somehow less responsible than using this artillery sight approach to lobbing in shots onto a target is crazy. The dude's a smart guy, and it takes a lot of mental gymnastics to not be able to equate those two. There may be some nuanced explanation on that makes total sense. It's not immediately obvious to me. But I'll counter your technique with one better. If bullet drop on a 9mm projectile is about 5 inches at 100 yards, depending on what load you pick and what your zero is, and if I am zeroed at 25 yards, which my load happens to have a converging zero at about 55 yards, if I need to dial in that extra 5 inches so that I'm zeroed at 100 yards, I can adjust my dot up by 5 clicks and I will be on at 100 yards. And at all other distances closer to that, I'll be within the margin of error that iron sights would typically provide because a red dot is a much finer aiming mechanism that you can zero very precisely in a way that iron sights just aren't. To that point, if I zero at 100 yards because I'm crazy and adjust my dot up by 5 clicks, that means at 25 yards, my shots are going to be about an inch high, and at 10 yards, it's going to be about a ½ inch high, which is a margin that is largely not noticeable by most iron sight shooters. So if my context for carrying a gun is to be able to make shots at 100 yards, like point of aim, point of impact, then I can zero at 100 yards. Now, in theory, you could get a set of fixed irons that are zeroed for 100 yards with whatever hold you want to use to hold, but I'm just having a hard time understanding how using a grosser aiming strategy using irons is somehow better for precise or distance shooting than a red dot where you focus on your target and you can see your whole target the whole time.
Do something that they believe will buy them aptitude. And that's really what I'm talking about here. Most of the time, a red dot on a pistol is used as a crutch to achieve aptitude that otherwise could not be obtained.
And he finishes calling red dots a crutch, and to an extent they probably are. They allow older shooters whose eyes are aging out of irons to be able to continue to shoot at a higher level. And they allow people whose mind don't really understand 3 focal planes and can't use iron sights as well as a single focal plane aiming strategy. They allow those types of people to shoot at a level that would be difficult for them to reach otherwise. And for all of the normal people, it becomes a force multiplier, as we've discussed. And based on the argument that you're making that you can't buy aptitude, like, I'm sure there is a segment that thinks that by getting a dot on their pistol, they are going to be buying capability. But I mean, you know as well as I do that the fundamentals are fundamental, and the gun doesn't care whether it has a dot on it or not. If you've got a bad grip, that bullet's going to your support side and down. It's just going to happen. I think what it is ultimately is you want people to walk up the hill to school both ways in 3 foot of snow just like you did when you were growing up.
You definitely did have rain. What are you talking about? Nope, only hail the size of my fist. And you walked uphill both ways to get to school, right? Sure did, 20 miles. I remembered like a warm summer day, which we didn't have either. Only nuclear winter.
And to VSO's credit, I am pumped for you because you're going to get to train with Scott Jedlinski, who's a guy I would like to train with. He is a stud. And I can't wait for when you get done with that class and you come out of it a changed man and make your I was wrong video as a follow-up to these 2 videos that you've just made. In no way do I want to discourage you from doing what you're doing. I think it's awesome that you're doing so good on your channel. I want people to go check out the channel, check out the videos. Guys, be respectful. Don't heckle him. I mean, he just doesn't know what he doesn't know on red dots. So that's really it, guys. Just wanted to kind of throw that out there. He kind of lobbed a softball at me, and I had to defend the honor of my precious red dots. But I wish VSO all the success in the world. He has a great YouTube channel. You should check it out. No name calling, guys. Be civil in the comments. You don't have to agree with everything he says. You don't have to agree with everything I say. That's kind of the beauty of the internet, guys. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. See you guys.